Greetings, all. Welcome to Aquarian Diary. I'm your host, John Irving. It is July 7th, 2025. This topic is too big to cover in one single episode, so this is part one of a multi-part series on Uranus transiting Gemini. The first part here is an introduction in terms of how it will be playing out for us and humanity as a whole, the changes and trends that we may expect to see due to this shift of energy. Of course, from my perspective, it is a prerequisite to listen to part one first. We have another very major change occurring, technically, starting on July 7th of 2025. And that is, of course, Uranus beginning to transit Gemini. And it has been about 84 years since this last commenced. So this is a big deal. Many people will have never experienced this before. Of course, this is on top of other major shifts that have occurred in recent times. Pluto more permanently moving into Aquarius, Neptune moving into Aries, Saturn moving into Aries, Jupiter moving into Cancer. All of these things occurring in close proximity to each other is a really big deal. I'm going to give you a brief introduction into what this change means. The people most affected by this transit are going to be Sun or rising, Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces. Or if you have any personal planets or points in those signs, they will be directly affected as well. Also, if you have Sun or Ascendant or personal planets or points in late Taurus, late Leo, late Scorpio, or late Aquarius, you're being affected by this as well, although that's more in the shorter term. And again, there's going to be dates on the screen. There are far too many variables for me to cover in a single YouTube episode. If you're into astrology, you can check your own chart and transits. If you're not and you really want to know about this stuff in more detail, you can always book a reading. And there will be links in the episode description to that. Let's talk about Uranus first. Uranus is essentially a change agent. And from a higher perspective, what it does is it brings changes, usually dramatic and often sudden and unexpected, to areas of our life. So think of it this way. If you have been stagnating or stuck, Uranus will break that pattern or situation or circumstance. And it can do so quite abruptly and surprisingly and dramatically. A lot of people are stuck or stagnant, but they will stay in situations that aren't really serving them simply because it feels secure or safe. But from a higher perspective, that isn't necessarily the best thing for us because we didn't come here to be stuck, to be kind of hiding out and sheltering and avoiding change or evolution because we want to feel secure. So like I said, Uranus will free us from those situations, even if we don't necessarily know that it's in our highest good. Changes will often occur or be forced upon us through outside circumstances, people, situations, or whatever, to liberate us, to free us from situations where we are stuck. But we can experience this as a tremendous amount of disruption and sometimes even unwelcome changes because we don't understand the benefit of what's happening. So sometimes it can be quite upsetting when we're in a holding pattern and suddenly that pattern is broken. And like I said, the changes seem to come at us through other people, situations, jobs, careers, relationships, whatever. Things end or change and we're sitting there going like, what the hell just happened? I don't like this. But again, on another level, it's in our highest good. So initially, a lot of these changes can appear to be unwelcomed or undesirable. And it's often not until later on that we look back and say, oh, I'm glad that change occurred. Say it's a relationship that suddenly ends that you've been in for a long time, and the relationship isn't necessarily rewarding, but you're attached to the stability of it, and you're resistant to change. The relationship suddenly ends, and now you're free, and you have to kind of like start over, but it's actually a good thing. You didn't come here to not grow. So often these changes can be very surprising. And sometimes, if we're really stuck, they can even appear to be quite traumatic. Imagine that you live in some other solar system somewhere in the universe where everyone thought and believed the same things, and everything was the same, and everything was predictable, and nothing ever changed. There's no color, there's no variation, there's no idiosyncrasies. It's static and predictable. Now, you might feel very safe, but at the same time, it would be hell. Nobody would want that. Enter Uranus. Uranus introduces change and helps us see things differently from different perspectives, sometimes just for the sake of that. Because nobody wants to live in a hive mind universe, unless you're like an ant or a bee or something like that, and we're not. Now, Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, and Taurus is a very earthy, grounded energy. The energy of Taurus deals with material reality, material things that we acquire that give us a sense of security. So these are things that we value. We place a value on them. Let's say, for example, it's a house. I want a house so I don't have to pay rent, and I know what my mortgage payment is. The property will hopefully increase in value over time. It's a better investment than just renting, usually. This gives me a sense of security and control over my destiny because I always know where I can go and feel comfortable. I own it, and I have a sense of security around my living situation. Or it could be the wealth that you accumulate that gives you a sense of control over your life, your bank accounts, your income, that kind of stuff, right? It's very, very practical and pragmatic. And it varies a little bit for everybody. Like some people place a higher value on some things than others, and it depends on the person, and it depends on where you live and all these other kinds of things. But generally, it is this sense of like, this is my turf, I control it, makes me feel good, I can relax more, I feel safe and secure. So think about how those areas of life have been affected going back to 2018. The real estate market went bonkers. Housing and the cost of living have been crazy. Insurance, fires, floods, all of these things that have affected the real estate market. And this hasn't just occurred in the United States, it's occurred all over the world. Europe, Australia, Canada. Housing crisis, cost of living crisis. Many people moved and relocated. People moved to Florida. Now they're moving out of Florida. Many people went abroad, relocated internationally. We also had an unprecedented global crisis that kept millions and millions of people confined to their homes and changed the way we work and live. There were food shortages and hoarding. There were many, many changes in the way people lived and where they lived, and the costs and values associated with all of those things have been kind of crazy. There were floods and fires that have affected and displaced countless people. And our incomes and the way we make money and our financial system and e-commerce, the rise of digital currencies. Inflation went crazy, the cost of goods, the cost of everything from food to utilities, to travel, to technology. And we ended this period with these crazy tariffs and trade wars going on around the world. So there was so many changes in the area of finance and money and property and investments in the stock market and inflation and all that stuff. There were radical changes in all of those areas. In many regards, this is a function of Uranus transiting Taurus since 2018. There's another aspect of this that I need to talk about, and this is where I get a bit antsy, because I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I'm aware that people have a limited attention span. But one of the other prominent features of this period was the rise of radical and extreme reactionary movements around the world. Reactionaries are people who are considered to respond or react very aggressively or reflexively to changes to the status quo. Typically, they're conservatives or ultra-conservatives, social conservatives, fundamentalists, or ultra-traditional people, and the like. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus, of course, rules love. It also represents our values. Taurus is the least likely and the most resistant sign, generally, to change. It is fixed Earth. Now, what I'm about to say describes this energy on the collective. I know many people who are Taurus who are not like what I'm about to say, but on the collective, this is just the way it expresses and manifests. And not everybody is an extremist reactionary, of course, right? It's just a segment of the population. So when we get this really intense radical energy of Uranus coming into Taurus, as it did again since 2018, it can express just like I described. This would be things like people wanting to go back to some idealized vision of the past, where there is a lot of structure and order and stability and predictability. We can think of things like authoritarianism, patriarchy, all that stuff. Extreme beliefs around traditional gender roles and relationships. Think the idealized notion of the 1950s, which in fact wasn't actually all that great for most people, unless you were white, male, and privileged, which most of the world is not. So there has been a lot of political and social movements that have been quite radical, and we're still seeing that playing out today, especially like, for example, in the United States. It's very extreme. Now, we know that socially we are evolving into a more egalitarian age, where there will be less of a hierarchical, top-down, authoritarian type structure. But if you perceive that your values, whatever those are, and let's face it, many of them are arbitrary, you can get extremely dogmatic, and under this influence, you can use pretty radical and extreme, if not even shocking, tactics to try and impose your worldview on other people. I vehemently reject that. I'm not ideological, and I don't seek to or have any desire to impose my philosophy or worldview on anybody else. But if somebody else tries to do it to me, I'm sure going to resist, because I'm like, well, what right do you have to impose your values or belief system or religion upon me? So I'm quite accepting of other people's beliefs, but I'm not dogmatic. So there's no question that we have seen a lot of really radical and extreme movements arise during this time. And I have talked about this before in distant past episodes. I'll link some of them in the episode description about this trend and how, for example, it compares to like what happened in the 1930s. And there's definitely parallels. So as far as I'm concerned, that is also a function of Uranus transiting Taurus, where we get extreme conservative views and movements. Will those movements and trends peter out when Uranus moves into Gemini, which is an air sign ruled by Mercury? So Mercury is mental, and it's air, and it's mutable. It moves, and it's fluid. It is less dogmatic and rigid. It is more intellectual, and it is more open-minded and rational. So draw your own conclusions. We have to take into account the other transits that are occurring, of course, like Saturn in Aries, Neptune in Aries, Pluto in Aquarius. We'll see how it plays out. So Uranus is going to move into Gemini on July 7th through November 7th. So it moves into Gemini for 4 months, and it's going to start retrograding on September 6th. It'll move back into Taurus from November 7th until April 25th of next year, when it will move into Gemini more permanently, more or less all the way through spring of 2033. So we're just getting a taste of Uranus moving into Gemini for the next few months. And then we have another spell at the end of Taurus through spring of next year before Uranus is in Gemini more permanently. Uranus's orbit is 84 years. So that's more or less an average lifetime. So Uranus will transit your chart, if you live to be 84 roughly, Uranus will transit all 12 houses of your chart, about 7 years per sign, per house. So, what will Uranus in Gemini look like? Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is a very, very different energy. Taurus is earth, Mercury is air. And Mercury is known as the messenger. It's all about communication, the way that we communicate, the way that we think, the things that we talk about, the things that catch our attention. It governs things like talking and speaking and writing. It has a fairly short attention span. It likes to have quite a bit of mental stimulation. It can get bored easily. It can go from one subject to another quite quickly. Think of it flitting around like a butterfly, from one flower to the next, on and on and on, constantly moving. Very quick, fast energy. People with strong Gemini are good communicators and speakers, and their minds are very quick. Often, people with a lot of Gemini or strong Mercury placements can be involved in things like the media, communication, speaking, journalism, reporting, that kind of stuff, because they get stimulated by all these things. Linguistics and speaking and talking and publishing. And also trade and commerce. Go back in history to like the Silk Road, and there would be the markets along the way where the merchants would gather to sell and trade their goods. And while they were doing that, they would convey news and information from distant lands. That's how people got news back in those days. We conveyed knowledge and news and information to each other just by speaking. So it can also deal with commerce and trade, buying and selling. It's fun, fascinating energy, but it can be a bit ungrounded. I knew somebody years ago who was really strong Gemini, and I would be going somewhere and I would see this guy standing on the sidewalk talking to somebody. Almost every time I saw him, he was standing having a conversation with someone different. He was constantly talking, always on the go, always speaking and talking to different people. That's just the way he was. Very mercurial and changeable, right? Again, because they don't have a huge attention span. They like mental stimulation, so they can connect with people who are very different from each other, very malleable that way. So how is this going to play out? One thing I can say for sure is that the speed and pace of communication and the flow of information and news and things like that is going to be very, very fast and relentless. So like social media, and we've already been seeing this as Uranus has been moving closer to Gemini recently. There's a constant stream of stuff happening and it changes really, really quickly. It can be quite exhausting and overstimulating because the flow of information is incessant and intense and very rapid. And the energy of Uranus can be quite ungrounded, very electric and intense. So being overstimulated and being overwhelmed with news and information and communication is going to be a theme. Taurus, where Uranus has been, is an earth-grounded sign. Gemini is already a fast-moving energy. It's a mental energy. So when you combine Uranus with Gemini, it's going to be fast, and it's also going to be pretty crazy because Uranus turns everything kind of on its head. We're going to be hearing things and communicating things and with our neighbors and people around us and stuff that at times you're just going to be going like, what did you just say? Or what just happened? Are you kidding me? Like stuff that seems to be like out of left field and just wild. And people will be behaving in quite unpredictable manners as well in the way that they communicate and what's on their minds and what they're thinking about, which of course can make them act a bit crazy too. So everything is going to be hyped up and intense and changing very, very fast in a quite ungrounded way. Another possibility is that because Uranus kind of flips everything on its head, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, how we could in fact see an opposite reaction to technology and things like the internet, where we see people go back to more of an analog version of reality. In other words, where technology is rejected to a degree, and people want to spend their time and their energy dealing with things that are more tangible and natural and real, as opposed to virtual reality or the internet. because, like I said, Uranus can have the opposite effect of what you expect. Or it may be a combination of the two. Maybe people will spend less time online. Maybe people will reject aspects of media and consumerism and things like that, where digital life will in some ways be rejected for something that is more tangible and real. The other thing is that Gemini is the twins. It's like the two sides of the coin. One side of the coin presents itself one way, and the other side can present itself in the opposite way, diametrically opposed. So another thing that we might see is even more division and more polarization in the way that people think and communicate, as if we kind of need that. We've been dealing with very polarized beliefs for a long time, but especially since Uranus went into Taurus, because Taurus represents our values, what we think is important. So we had kind of radical values expressed that amplified a lot of polarization. And now people are going to be communicating and expressing and thinking in very polarized terms too. Sometimes people might even be saying or doing things that are contradictory, where they have or hold or express opinions counterintuitively polarizing or conflicting. We may have to just get used to a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's not so much that Gemini is engaged in self-deception. It's just that they always see two sides to everything, and they are insatiably curious. So where do they stand? How do you deal with two opposing viewpoints, where from your perspective both might be valid even if they contradict each other? It's kind of like the message is more important than the medium, if you can wrap your head around that. Gemini is about the discovery of the message, and the messages are always different, in large or small ways. And that's what I've observed over many years when you're dealing with Gemini, is that it's about the message. It's not like they don't respect truth. It's just that everyone has a different message, and the message is always relative. And the message is relevant simply because it exists. And because of that, they can be a bit indiscriminate. As the winged messenger, their job is simply to identify and deliver the message, to get it from A to B. My intention is for this episode to be a bit more personally oriented, so that people can see how it might play out in their own lives. But there are some fascinating things happening on the macro level for all of humanity, and I should probably do an episode just about that. However, briefly, on the macro, we have this really amazing and powerful configuration where we have Pluto in Aquarius, which is air, Saturn and Neptune in Aries, which is fire, and Uranus now in Gemini, which is air. So these are all mutually compatible energies. In addition to that, Pluto and Uranus are trining each other. Also, Pluto is sextiling Saturn and Neptune in early Aries, and so is Uranus. Again, Uranus trine Pluto, Pluto sextile Saturn and Neptune, Neptune and Saturn sextile Uranus, especially over the next year or so. This means that all of the energies are flowing very harmoniously between all of the major outer planets. It's really remarkable. Plus, of course, Neptune and Saturn are at the very beginning of Aries, which is a very potent beginning point for new major cycles. Additionally, we had the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter occur in Aquarius in December of 2020, formalizing a 200-year-long cycle of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in air after having spent the prior 200 years conjuncting in earth signs. This adds another dimension to this whole equation where we are in more of an air cycle than we used to be. It is a lighter, faster, less dense, material tangible energy where change can happen very quickly. I have talked about some of this stuff before in past episodes, some of them quite a long time ago. This all speaks to very profound and rapid change and evolution. There's a lot of air and fire, so there's not a lot of resistance. In many ways, I see this as being absolutely epic. It's lighter and also profound, fast and intense, with a lot of movement and change. Everyone knows, for example, how AI has become a big thing in recent years. Because Uranus deals with technology, we can expect to see tremendous and rapid developments, inventions, and progress around technology and communications. Things probably that we haven't even considered before. Like, this is probably the end of the fossil fuel era. We will see new forms of energy and technology and transportation that, like I said, we can't even imagine, that will change many aspects of civilization, in addition to all of the consciousness raising that I have also talked about before. And as I referenced in my Pluto in Aquarius episode, which I published over 3 years ago, February of 2022, in fact, because Uranus deals with things that are very foreign, if not alien, it would not surprise me at all if during this period we had developments in the area of disclosure or more direct and open contact with intelligent alien species or civilizations, where the general public comes to know that this is a reality. Because of all these harmonious aspects between these major planets in fire and air, and the trine between Uranus and Pluto, while sextiling Saturn and Neptune, like you couldn't make all this up. Advancements in our understanding and awareness of reality, our consciousness, and like I said, even direct contact with technologies or species that are alien to our solar system would not surprise me. Like I said, I actually predicted that over 3 years ago. I'm just reiterating it here. One other major point of concern is that the United States natal Uranus is at roughly 9 degrees of Gemini. And Uranus transiting Gemini historically has correlated with major wars, such as the American Revolution, which I've also talked about, the American Civil War, and World War II. This is not to say that there needs to be a major conflict, but it's very clear right now that there are revolutionary forces playing out before our very eyes, for example, in the United States. There are many people right now who are concerned about a large-scale paramilitary force being put in place in the United States. And there is tremendous polarization and division within the country right now. Furthermore, the United States went through its Pluto return, which is roughly every 248 years, when Pluto was in Capricorn. And we are now dealing with the aftermath of that. I published a couple episodes on this topic. The first one was in January of 2022, 3.5 years ago, titled USA Pluto Return 2022, Civil War or Transformation. As usual, I will link these episodes I'm referencing in the episode description. Now, Pluto returns have been associated historically with the beginning of the end of empires. And there's no question that the United States right now currently is extremely dysfunctional, and it has countries like China nipping at its heels, kind of in a race for geopolitical dominance. There's a lot that has to happen, and we'll see how this plays out. But there are very, very intense dynamic forces at play. Again, I'm skimming over this stuff here about the macro because I could literally talk about it for a very long time, and this episode would simply get too long. I do want to be on the record, though, as stating that some of these things are concerns. The breakout of war, or something that resembles civil war, major political and geopolitical and economic changes, which are already taking place. The relationship between the United States and its allies has profoundly changed and degraded in just a matter of months. This is completely unprecedented historically. There's concerns about the US dollar being the reserve currency and so forth. Not saying all of these things are going to happen overnight. It'll remain to be seen. Can the United States overcome its extremely polarized internal division? And if so, how does that happen? And we have all these other foreign players involved now too. Russia, China, Europe. Europe is now suddenly investing very significant amounts of energy and resources into building up its military capabilities. So again, I don't want to go too far off on this tangent, but I do want to mention that here. For you personally, a lot is going to depend on what house in your own personal chart Uranus is moving into and what house it's moving out of, because Uranus in Taurus is coming to a close, well, fully by next spring. And Uranus in Gemini is just, we're at the very early stages of that. So, for example, if you had Taurus in a cardinal house, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, those areas of life may have been very unstable and unpredictable to you. And that may be coming to an end. So, in many ways, this is going to be a good thing. On the other hand, if you have Gemini in one of the cardinal houses, 1st, 4th, 10th, or 7th, you're going to be entering a period of quite a bit of instability and unpredictability, again, depending on which house Gemini is in. If the level of interest in this topic is sufficient, I will publish a couple more episodes going into how this transit will affect you more personally. But as I've said, it takes me a long time to produce episodes like this. So if this episode doesn't get enough views, I may not do that. If you are interested in learning more about how this will affect you personally, please subscribe so that you will be notified when I do publish those episodes, if I do. If you want to dig into this more precisely, because you really need to take into account all your planetary placements and points and positions, not just the sign and the house, but transits to other planets and stuff, which can have major impacts. If you really want to dig into that, check out my website at aquariandiary.com or email me at aquariandiary@gmail.com and book a session with me, and we can look at all this stuff in a lot more detail. What I'm providing you here is quite superficial. It's for the general public. I do have quite a backlog for readings, so you have to be patient. Also, I have published a few new episodes recently after being on hiatus for a few months, so check my channel if you're interested in those. And I appreciate all your likes, shares, and subscribes. That really helps the channel. It takes days of work to produce things like this, so I really appreciate it if you can support me that way. And I also always look forward to and appreciate your comments. It really makes my day, and it also helps other people too, because they lend more context to what we're discussing here. When you chime in with your comments and share your experience and perspective, you are helping other people, so please view it through that lens. For more detail, check the episode description for other episodes or articles that are related or that I mentioned. And if you're interested in a reading with me, I'll put a link to that as well. Many sincere thanks to everyone who supports me, especially my YouTube members and astrology clients. Thank you very much. Take care, all the best, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.